What is going on YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the third album by Beyonce. Basically, this project is called I Am Sasha Fierce, and it came out in the fall of 2008. Now, the thing about this particular project, it took me a while to get to this particular project by Beyonce. The thing about it was I was originally going to review this back in like the spring or so, 2016. I had this album, I got it from the library as far as that pitch kind of happened, but I just didn't get around to it because originally back in those days, I think I was about to give it like a poor score, and I just didn't want to score this album that low. I kind of didn't connect with as much of this album back in 2016 as far as that pitch kind of happened. I at least like songs like Sweet Dreams and a little bit of like Video Phone, some of those type ones, but there were a bunch of songs on this particular album. And that's the thing about this particular album is it's split down the middle. There's down tempo songs and up tempo songs, and that's kind of the concept. That there just were a lot more down tempo songs than what I was willing to work with back at that particular point. So I delayed reviewing that particular project, and I just never got around to it in later years as far as that pitch kind of happened. But yeah, it's been since early 2016 since I've reviewed any Beyonce projects or Destiny's Child projects I'd have to suppose. So we're going to get back to some of these. I just would have to suppose it's a good pitch to kind of get this, but I just would have to say definitely like this album. Had some great singles on here. This album had some great singles on there as far as that pitch kind of particularly happened with. I just would have to suppose had 9 of them. So basically, the particular thing about it is on the standard edition of this album, there's only 10 or 11 songs, but on the deluxe, there's 16 songs on here. So we're about 4 singles on each side of the album, I'd have to say, plus one extra one. So it's kind of the concept about it. 9 singles that we're going to talk about. Or really, I would have to say, well, there's at least 8 singles. Yeah, there's 8 singles off this particular album. About 3 from the Beyonce side, 5 from the Sasha Fierce side. So the thing about Sasha Fierce is that's an introduction of a personality from Beyonce as far as that pitch kind of happens with it. Those are the more up tempo and kind of more dance heavy type songs as far as that kind of particular thing kind of happens. But it's interesting just because Beyonce didn't really always. It's interesting just because Beyonce didn't always typically kind of have this dance job. I mean, she did have some songs like the song she did with Slim Thug, like Check Up on It, and some of those type ones, and Lose My Breath, and some of those type ones with Destiny's Child, and some of those type ones, Baby Boy, some of those type tunes. But I would definitely have to suppose, from what I remember of B Day, that was not that jivey a particular album. It was more known like the single that she did with Jay-Z, which I forget what that one was called. Like Deja Vu was kind of like a summer malaise of a song, and then songs like Irreplaceable and some of those type ones from B Day were just a lot more malaise. Beyonce didn't really step out as heavily on that particular album as she does on this one. I'm definitely glad for that concept because this is just a lot more jiviness on this particular project, even though some of the singles that were off of the Beyonce side of things, the more down tempo, even if some of the songs off the Beyonce side of things charted heavier, just with songs like If I Were a Boy and Halo and some of those type ones. This is kind of the concept. But I mean, this is a pretty widespread album. This was a commercial big deal. This is one of the largest selling albums of 2009. It was a pretty big smash in late 2008 as far as that pitch kind of particularly kind of happened, and it lasted about into early 2010. So Beyonce had a pretty large appeal with this particular project. This was another hit for her. I really didn't pay attention to this much. I really didn't pay attention to this album as much back in the day when it first came out. I do at least remember like a couple of songs like If I Were a Boy, and I do at least remember a couple of songs from this album from back in the day like If I Were a Boy and Single Ladies Put a Ring on It. But for the most part, this one just kind of came and went as far as that particular pitch kind of happened with it, but it did last for quite a while, I'd have to suppose. So it was just kind of more, I just probably wasn't paying attention as heavily as far as that pitch kind of happened with it. But I do have to say it was a great album. Just would definitely have to suppose did a lot of things, was a big deal back around the time. Wasn't just big on like the rap and R&B charts, it was also pretty big in like pop radio and makeshift and rhythmic and adult contemporary and some of those type pitches. So it's just some good stuff to kind of get there. But yeah, there's 8 singles off this album. We're gonna go ahead and talk about some of these. So basically, the first single is If I Were a Boy. And I'll go ahead and say I recommend all 8 singles. That's an easy kind of pitch. Yeah, it's pretty awesome to get 8 full-blown singles, just that direct kind of widespread appeal as far as that particularly kind of happens, and then to connect with all 8 of them. And then on top of that, to connect with all 8 of them is pretty awesome, I'd have to suppose. That's definitely a pretty big deal. But the first single, like I was saying, was If I Were a Boy. This is like a malaise kind of dreary pop makeshift of a song, I'd have to say. It's a steadfast and kind of homely and wholesome feel that it has, but it's strong and catchy. But this song is particularly strong and catchy, I'd have to suppose. So this one's pretty similar to So this song's pretty similar in pitch and cadence to Irreplaceable off of B Day, I'd have to suppose. It's a pretty nice one to kind of having that down tempo kind of feel overall with it. It's just a very steadfast, homely type song. This works in that similar type pitch as far as that kind of particularly kind of happens. Just a real kind of relatively kind of just basic type song to kind of have like some dreary pop just in within that sense of just kind of cartoons and just overall just kind of steady cartoons as far as that pitch kind of happens, just like some makeshift on the way home and just pitches like that. Just got done with work, some of those type things, just as far as like 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock p.m. type malaise as far as that pitch kind of happens with this. It's a pretty nice one. This is a pretty affable song. I do like a lot more of the jivey songs on this particular album more, but this is a pretty steadfast type one to kind of get on here. So that's a nice one. Single Ladies Put a Ring on It's the second single. And this is kind of a poppy dance club bounce of a song, I'd have to say. This has some large commercial bite, definitely. And this is like a vanilla dance song at this particular point, but it's got a pretty widespread. But this song has a pretty widespread appeal about it, and it's pretty jivey, I'd have to suppose. It's a pretty nice one. This is very much like a vanilla type tune, like I was saying. It has a lot of commercial bite. I think this was a song that hit #1 back in the day as far as that pitch kind of particularly happened. This is one of the larger songs off this particular album. Definitely up there with Halo and If I Were a Boy. Those are some of the biggest ones. This song has like about 600 million plays on Spotify, so this song is a pretty big deal. Halo had over 1 billion plays. If I Were a Boy had over 550, something like that. Some of these were just some pretty widespread type ones. But this one, in terms of like dance orientation, just overall affability, in terms of like the sheer edginess that this song particularly kind of has, this is a pretty basic and overall vanilla song. This is one of the more straightforward ones. This is kind of like an entry type one. Dance club song for like 6:30, 7 o'clock p.m. as you're just getting there, something within that pitch as far as that kind of goes. It's a very vanilla kind of dance song, but it works. It hit #1. It was a big deal. Probably one of Beyonce's largest songs, especially in recent times. It has some pretty nice ones, but it's just kind of, like I was saying, it's vanilla, but it does have its commotion about it, so that's a good concept. Diva was the third single, and this is another highlight. This one's pretty similar to Single Ladies. I'd have to suppose just a little bit edgier within that sense. This is kind of like a pounding, kind of hypnotic dance knock of a song, I'd have to say. This has some southern bass, I would definitely feel like. And this is just a trunk rattler for the ladies as far as that pitch kind of happens with it. This is like the female version of a Millie by Lil Wayne, I would definitely suppose. Beyonce did a pretty good job with that. Just has a repeating kind of hook on there that this works pretty well. The song's a little bit edgier. Like I was saying, the song's a little bit edgier than Single Ladies, I would have to suppose. It's probably about 20%, 25% more edgy than that particular tune. But both these are pretty poppy and just overall kind of more watered down as far as that pitch kind of happens. These are just some vanilla dance tunes from Beyonce as far as that pitch kind of happens with it. But I just would have to suppose it works just within the sense just because Beyonce was as large as she is. So it's just compared to other folks that you're going to see do dance songs just within that sort of aspect, especially in like the 2010s with like some EDM type stuff. These are both some vanilla type tunes, both Single Ladies and Diva. But I would have to say about these for Beyonce, just because of her widespread appeal, they still work. It's just kind of the concept. These were just kind of the breadwinners and had chart appeal about them, but they are still pretty edgy. They are still pretty stellar. They are still pretty stellar just within that sense, I'd have to suppose. That's some good stuff there. Halo was the fourth single. This is another highlighted one. This is basically like an emotional kind of power ballad, I would have to suppose. This is some R&B makeshift, definitely, and this is just a great regular warm day. The song just has some great regular warm day emotion about it, I would definitely suppose, and this just has a similar pitch to 2000s era Rihanna. So I definitely feel like this is another makeshift type tune, just very similar to If I Were a Boy, just a little bit more peppy snap about it, I would have to suppose. Both of these are like a good 1-2 punch, just like Single Ladies and Diva are a good 1-2 punch. If I Were a Boy and Halo are a good 1-2 punch for like some emotional power, for like some emotional kind of makeshift just within the motions of just like just within standard day commerce and stuff like that. Just good after work kind of traverse as far as that pitch kind of happens with it. Just some great stuff to kind of have there. These are just some steadfast ones, but it's an excellent kind of pitch that Beyonce is able to deliver on some of these tunes because it's just a different sense of emotion. It's basically like you're getting a whole album of songs like Baby Boy and a whole album of songs like Irreplaceable. It's just kind of the concept of just half Baby Boy, half Irreplaceable, just within those sorts of pitches as far as that kind of happens with it. Just circa 2008, 2009 as far as that, just circa 2008, 2009 as far as that particular pitch kind of happens with it, I'd have to suppose. But these are some nice ones. Ego was the fifth single, and this is definitely a pretty nice one. This is like a primped kind of outstepping city sights gem, I'd have to say. This is just some elegant dance jive, I would definitely feel like, and this is just a modest evening out fun of a song, I'd have to suppose, and it's just kind of a sultry urban kind of vibe this song kind of particularly kind of has. So this is one that reminds me of something that Usher or Trey songs would do just within that pitch. This one's a little bit more R&B type. This one has a little bit more of an R&B type tone as opposed to like a pop type tone, I'd have to suppose. It's a good pitch to kind of get with that. This is just more for like the rhythmic kind of charts, I definitely would feel like, but it's just a pretty elegant one. I definitely like the concept. This one's a little bit more ritzy and primped as far as that pitch kind of happens with it, but I just kind of like the concept of it. It's kind of like some kind of flashy kind of date night type. This kind of has some flashy kind of date night type feels as far as that pitch kind of happens, just with the more kind of frou-frou type feeling, just with that overall kind of jive about it. It's just some good concepts. It's just some good concepts to kind of get that one. Definitely kind of an offhanded Beyoncé song. Not too many songs that she's done just within this particular pitch of this one. So it's a good, nice one to kind of have just an original one, I definitely would say. Sweet Dreams is the sixth single. This is a really good highlight. This is probably one of my Sweet Dreams is probably one of my more favorite songs off the album as a whole, even on the deluxe edition, I'd have to suppose. This is like a thrilling kind of nightclub jive of a song, I'd have to say. This just has a litty pace and melodies about it. Definitely the melodies are pretty damn excellent on this particular song. This is an electric dance highlight, I would definitely have to suppose, and it's just some snappy kind of fun. So this is just a real nice jivey type one. The electronic type beat just really works pretty heavily. This is one of the most riveting songs in the album. Definitely is on the Sasha Fierce side, just would have to suppose. This just has a lot of jive and just overall compellingness just about it. Easy one to kind of get things in motion, get the rump shaking, some of that type of stuff as far as that pitch kind of particularly happens with it. Just an easy kind of dance club highlight, I'd have to suppose. This really works within a thrilling kind of sense. And then Broken Hearted Girl is the seventh single. This is another highlighted one. This is on the Beyoncé side, so this is another kind of more makeshift type tune. But this one's a dramatic kind of rainy day makeshift of a song, I'd have to say. Broken Hearted Girl is kind of a dramatic rainy day makeshift malaise of a song, I'd have to suppose. This has a moody pitch about it, and it's just a good extra variety of a song from Beyoncé, I'd have to suppose. So this is kind of one. I'd say that there's like some songs like this. This is kind of more Broken Hearted Girl is just a more rainy day type version of Irreplaceable off the B-Day album. I'd have to suppose it's the same sort of pitch and just kind of moodiness of that particular one, just a little bit more dramatic and just kind of more almost melodramatic, but just kind of in a rainy day sort of sense of that sort of appeal towards it. It's just very similar to like Halo and If I Were a Boy, just a little bit more malaised about it and just kind of more anguished, I'd have to suppose. But it is a pretty good concept just to kind of get that one. Definitely like that one. Then Video Phone was the eighth single, and this is the last one I'm going to talk about. There is actually a ninth single called Why Don't You Love Me, but I'm reviewing the Spotify edition that only has 16 songs. But I'm reviewing the Spotify edition that only has the 16 songs on here, so that one's not on this particular edition. But I'm going to have to say Video Phone is the eighth single. Video Phone is like an electro dance bounce of a song, I'd have to say. It's got a hypnotic kind of tempo about it, and the melodies are really hot on this particular song, I'd have to suppose. This is just an overall vibe that gets things jumping. The overall vibe of this song just gets things jumping pretty easily, I'd have to suppose. So this is a pretty highlighted one. A little bit turned down in energy compared to Sweet Dreams, but it's still pretty riveting, I'd have to suppose. Probably about like an 8.5 or a 7.5. And Video Phone probably has like a 7.75 or an 8.5 in terms of the energy that it particularly kind of has. If Sweet Dreams is like a 10 or something like that. And then Diva's pretty, about 6 out of 10, like Single Ladies, some of those type ones. Or Diva's like a 7 or an 8 out of 10 also in energy. And the Single Ladies is like a 5 or a 6 in terms of the vanilla-ness of it. But I'd have to say Video Phone's definitely pretty electric one. This is like a good electro kind of almost. Video Phone's just a real electronic type one that just works pretty heavily. This is another good original type song to get from Beyonce. This is a pretty highlighted one. Just a pretty good pitch. This one didn't quite chart as heavily. Video Phone didn't quite chart as heavily, but Beyonce was up to the 8th single by this particular point. So there were plenty of songs that were all over the radio from Beyonce around this particular time. So it's kind of it's kind of fair ball that didn't quite have as much chart appeal as far as that pitch kind of particularly kind of happened with it. But these were some excellent ones. Basically, all 8 of the singles I recommend, just like I was saying. There were a lot of these. The Sasha Fierce side was pretty dominant, I'd have to suppose. Definitely like the concept. I'm glad that Beyonce had all these good jivey up-tempo type songs that just worked within that pitch. But then, surprisingly, at least on the single, she was able to have some down-tempo moments that just delivered pretty well. The similar pitches to like Cater to You by Destiny's Child and Irreplaceable off of her B-Day album, some of those type ones. Just some good pitches kind of have within that sense. Just some clever concepts, some good songwriting as far as those pitches kind of happen. And this is just a pretty vast overall album that just had a lot of single appeal. It's just interesting to think that this is Beyonce's largest album in terms of commercial appeal. Just the fact that I probably should have paid a lot more attention to this album back in the day. It just would have been a good pitch to have done. But I just look after this pretty widespread type appeal that it has. Definitely would have to say. Really liked a lot of these. But to talk about the rest of the album, the unfortunate thing about it is despite the fact that I recommend all 8 of the singles out of 16 songs on this particular album, I wound up recommending 11. So the pitch behind it is just the fact that the 5 songs I don't recommend would just be 5 songs off of like the standard. The 5 songs I don't recommend are all off of the I Am side of the disc, which is the more down-tempo type moments. So some of these songs would be Disappear, Ave. So these 5 songs would be Disappear, Ave Maria, Satellites, Smash Into You, and That's Why You're Beautiful. So the thing about these particular songs is all of these were just kind of more steadfast. The thing about all 5 of these songs I listed is just the fact that these are all kind of more down-tempo and homely type moments that just didn't really have much of an interesting spark of appeal as far as that particular kind of stuff happened with it. These were just all kind of more steadfast type ones that just felt like irreplaceable clones and things like that just didn't really have a lot of interesting compellingness. It's kind of they just lacked edge and just over. I mean, the songwriting was probably there just within like a standard kind of makeshift kind of sense if you're just looking for a car ride home type stuff, things like that, just within a standard drear and malaise of like 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock p.m. Some of those type pitches of just getting off work, but most of these just didn't really have much of an edge to really have much notoriety for. I just would have to suppose these were just kind of more plain and lukewarm type ones that just didn't really have much appeal or edge towards them. So it's just kind of the concept about it. But I would have to say, me basically recommending 11 songs out of 16 on the deluxe edition of this particular album. I'm going to go ahead and give this album like an 8.75 out of 10. I definitely feel like it dismissed the quality of being like a 9 out of 10 album. If I had recommended 12 out of 16 songs in this particular album, I would have given it like a 9 out of 10. It's just the pitch about it. I mean, it does have 8 massive singles. I would definitely have to suppose that's pretty awesome to kind of get all those. Definitely pretty good pitch. The social score is probably going to get a 10 out of 10, but I would say the regular score 8.75 just within that pitch. Just too many just too many steadfast, homely kind of makeshift songs as far as that pitch kind of happened with it. I just would have to suppose there's some good stuff to kind of get on here, but it's just kind of the concept that it just had maybe a few too many kind of more. This album just had a few too many steadfast, kind of homely, makeshift type songs as far as that pitch kind of happened with it. Just kind of overstuffed them a little bit. I feel like maybe half the album is a little bit much because I do feel like there were kind of like some more down tempo or at least mid down tempo kind of songs on like the Sasha Fierce side of things, which were supposed to be the up tempo kind of moments. So maybe there could have been like some up tempo snap on some of like the IM side of things as far as that pitch can happen, but there really weren't. For the most part, all of these are pretty down tempo and this makeshift as far as that pitch can happen. It's not to say that those are bad. I mean, I definitely feel like with the singles from the IM side of things, it definitely worked pretty well. But the rest of the album cuts on that side of the disc, but the rest of the album cuts on that side of the album are just not quite as compelling within that edge. So it's just kind of the concept of it. But yeah, the social score gets a 10 out of 10. 8 singles, you don't get much better than that for the most part in terms of pitches as far as that kind of appeal kind of has. Beyonce is pretty ubiquitous with music as far as that kind of thing happens with it. I just would have to suppose so some good stuff to kind of get there. Lots of pop and just overall has makeshift appeal, has pop appeal, this album has pop appeal, it has makeshift appeal, it has dance appeal, it has date night appeal, has overall just good amounts of pitches type appeals as far as that particular stuff kind of happens with it. Just a lot of good assortments, just things like that, some romantic type appeal, just overall things, some slow dance type appeal, just some overall good stuff to kind of have on here. It's just a pretty stretching album, good for just round the year as far as that pitch kind of happens with it. Just some great stuff to kind of have. Just really like the overall vivid kind of stuff that goes along with it. This is probably one of Beyonce's biggest albums. This outstretches like the stuff she did with Destiny's Child in her early days when she was on fire with songs like Crazy in Love and some of those type ones and Baby Boy, some of those type pitches as far as it goes with this. This is definitely social appeal. It's just off the meter. I'd have to suppose it's a real classic in terms of that sort of aspect. It's just, I mean, it really just missed being a classic in terms of overall just complete appeal, I'd say, by just like a hair or two, I'd have to suppose. It's really like a song or two shy of being like a 10 out of 10 album. It's just kind of the pitch behind it, I'd have to suppose. It's kind of how it happens to happen. But just lots of good variety and stuff like that as far as those things kind of happen with it. Just 8 singles to have so many good varieties and just overall things to kind of have just within plenty of markets and overall areas to kind of have that particular music. So some good stuff. In terms of the future, like Beyonce had just made an appearance at the Super Bowl 2024. So some good pitches. She's dropped some new singles. So apparently she's getting ready to put out some new stuff. She dropped the Renaissance album in 2022. There's going to be a series of those albums, so we'll have to see what's up with that. But I am going to get to some more Beyonce. I'll probably review her Beyonce 4 album, and then get to some Destiny's Child stuff, some stuff like that. So we'll definitely get to some more of these. But this is a pretty above quality album here, I'd have to suppose.